Good afternoon. I'll introduce the members of this round table that we have called DPO, Data Protection Officer. It proves how interested we all are in what obligations are needed to be such an individual. And this is actually a turning point in all these issues about cybersecurity and the challenges that companies have to face when they engage in these situations. We have a panel of experts with us. First of all, Mr. Calvo Medina, who is responsible for the assessment unit in the Spanish Data Protection Agency. He can give us a first-hand opinion of what the regulator thinks in all that has to do with the figure of the DPO. We also have José López Calvo on the far right. He's a consultant for the Council for Research of the Spanish government. Then Mr. Saiz, who is the Director of Data Privacy, and he's also the Director of the ISMS Fórum. And finally, we have Gianluca whom you all know. He is devoted to information systems of DFC Group. I'll give the floor, first of all, to Andrés, so he can explain what the view is for the professional future. You have the floor, Andrés. Thank you, Francisco. I'd like to start by thanking INCIBE for inviting me to take part at this 11th ENISE edition. I see that the new regulation for data protection is of concern. Although we speak of something new, the principles, however, that it has underlying, we already know about. Out of all these principles, perhaps the most novel one is that of accountability. In other words, to be proactive when you are responsible. In this sense, we have an accrual of new things that need to be done, the reports and whatnot, data protection by design or by default. All these principles of active responsibility seem to fall in the court of the responsible person, and this required some sort of standing, and that would be the DPO. It sounds like a Superman or Superwoman who's going to be in charge of doing lots of things. But let's qualify the tasks of the data protection officer and share them out throughout the organization. This sharing is obviously different depending on the size of the relevant business. The ideal thing would be to have one single person capable of doing everything. That's impossible. So when we are working on a certification scheme, the experts committee gave us a list of more than 200 tasks. 200 tasks that would require involving almost 200 different disciplines, and it's difficult to find this profile in one single person. So at the end of the day, one of the stumbling blocks is going to be precisely the organizational capacity in a large company, or being practical when we talk about an SME. Basically, this profile brings three levels: a legal level, a technical level, and then personal skills and capabilities to organize, to dialogue, to negotiate, etc. And as so, it is reflected in our certification scheme. With regards certification issues, I'd like to qualify that one of the concerns of the agency with this scheme was not to enter into a situation under the data protection regulation that speaks of certification for processes, services, and products, but to enable something in the market to give responsibility. We're speaking about zero cost like zero risk or zero responsibility does not exist. In Spain, we have a problem with some of these delegates whose quality is sometimes dubious and the cost is zero. So we started to work with the experts committee at the beginning of the year, And we managed to bring about a certification scheme that gives some security to the market. Thank you very much. The floor now is for the next speaker. I'd like to thank the INCIBE for inviting me to attend this event. It's a real pleasure for me. My experience as a DPO of the CSIC comes from the theoretical world. I have been more connected to the regulator for several years, and I had a bird's eye view, so to speak, of the treatment of personal data and the problems that arose. And now that I'm on the field, I've entered a very complicated organization. There are 11,000 staff, several thousand researchers, how many institutes scattered across Spain or even abroad. And the first approach that we are having when implementing the regulation is trying to be rational. Obviously, we cannot stop the CSIC, the SAIC, to set the system at zero. The apparatus has to continue working as we do adjustments. So there's a real risk of excess bureaucratization that we have to, of course, avoid. It's a temptation we come across. We need to dialogue with 130 institutions, and they cannot be working for you. You have to find some sort of realistic way out. Secondly, with regards to the role to be played by if it's independent or that of an external auditor, or is it a role more entrenched in the organization or the structure, some sort of a collaborator or a troubleshooter, or more of a managerial action? My opinion is that the role has to be the second one. If you belong to a team, you have to find solutions. The regulation, of course, says that you are independent, but at the end of the day, you cannot. At least I see it. You cannot purport to be independent and say what needs to be done without getting involved. I believe that this is a joint task. Andrés mentioned it. It cannot be a single person because it's very difficult. So we have to work with many individuals, with many different elements, etc. One of the essential elements is, obviously, that's the other side of the coin, with the technology departments, with the technology units. Although the regulation speaks of a DPO who needs to have some knowledge of legalese, it's not enough. We need to be supplemented by a technological vision as well as a legal vision. And finally, how are we doing the approach? Well, precisely little by little, we are creating a common repository. I insist that we have 130 institutes across the country and abroad. So it's necessary that in theory and in practice, all the workers of CSIC may access certain kinds of information, best practices, security measures, etc. And what we are creating is a repository with an intranet access that we are feeding into, which is going to be alive, and which we consider to be a support for communication and important flow of information. Thank you very much. I'll give you the floor now to Carlos. What do you think about the regulation? Thank you, Paco and INCIBE, for inviting me to take part here, and to thank you for bearing with this afternoon session instead of enjoying the sunny day outside. We'll speak about DPOs, and as a brief introduction, the other day I was asked whether I thought the DPO is going to be a professionally interesting figure in the future, or is this just going to become another issue of nuts and bolts, another utility task, which is practically automated. Well, it all depends on each company, of course. I assume some companies will have their confidentiality there, but I think it's something else, something interesting. Everyone is speaking of the digital transformation, the digital messages and whatnot. It's all about how important data are, which they're going to be more and more in any kind of company. So my first idea is that working as a professional of privacy, there may be a future in the next few years. At the end of the day, we come across a situation in which there are many people who do not wish to know anything about DPOs. They want to keep it far away from them. And others who have not paid much attention and want to be a DPO because they see an opportunity there. I think in Spain we have very good professionals for privacy. Not all will end up being DPOs in Spain. You don't need millions of DPOs either. There are many organizations that would. But we will need many privacy professionals. We'll have consultants, lawyers, solicitors, whatnot, that will play an important role here. There is some sort of an obsession as to DPOs, and I don't think that's exactly the solution. In ISMS Fórum and the Data Privacy Industry Institute, we have certified privacy professionals for 7 years now with our CDPP certification. We've held some 11 specialized courses. We have certified several hundred professionals in Spain, and our aim is to continue to professionalize professionals, certify professionals, under this new paradigm of the new laws where everyone must be up to date and trained on these issues. And of course, we are working also to become a certifier, accredited certifier agency together with INAT in order that DPOs may have some sort of education and certification to vouch for their actions and for them to be able to implement their actions. And also people ask me, I'm sure Andrés will mention something, certification is voluntary. I think more national and international certificators will spring up, perhaps more specialized, but they will be coexistent with these certifications focused on the scheme that has just been published. We can carry on later on if you wish. May I add that the next table is focusing on the professionalism and the competition capacity of cybersecurity professionals, so it ties in marvelously with this one. So, Luca, what do you think about this new regulation? In our countries, it's present in 14 out of 27 countries in the European scope where this regulation is going to be applicable. So we have a challenge, how to face this and how to comply. We have travelled far. We've been for 10 years now with the government structure to manage privacy, especially for Spain. Now we're escalating this. And at the end of the day, there are two options. One, to bring a technologist into the legal advice department, or to bring a legal person into the technological department. So the first thing seems to be more difficult than the second one. In other words, to bring a technologist in legal advisory, this piece will be feeling out. And at the end of the day, it's not going to work. Because you need to have a set of legal knowledge that you won't really have. In our viewpoint, we started 10 years ago by placing legal people in the technology department. Ever since the issue was held, that privacy was discussed, and not every legal expert will understand the day-to-day implications of this in fine detail. So, at the end of the day, I remember, if you're out of the scope, all the digital transformation, all these scopes where there's going to be privacy now, data mining, big data, the e-cloud, all of this will not be graspable. You have to be there, otherwise it will escape from your hands. So the DPO has to be prepared for this and work within the technological division. It's going to be a legal person with knowledge of computing and fully integrated into the division in order to offer a proper vision. And then we have the construction of a high level of governance. Until a short while ago, we had the governments that went from the middle management downwards through security coordinators at each entity, and now we are witnessing that it's shaped like a pyramid to reach the top as soon as possible. So I don't know what we're going to do, but at the end of the day, cybersecurity and privacy are elements, strategic elements for a company, especially if we think of reputational impact, etc. All that is now measured by technology. And so we're concluding the pyramid on one end in a pyramid shape, and soon we shall be witnessing the highest representation of responsibility of the group on the one hand, and on the other, we're concluding the plan. It's important to know how private companies are implementing this kind of figures. Thank you, Gianluca. I'd like to ask Andrés a couple of questions to see what you think about the position of the Spanish agency to the future. Are all companies going to be demanded to have DPO, or do you expect the regulators to do something about it, or what's the relationship between the DPO and the data protection head?
So the bill that we've had shows very clearly what the DPO requirements are. Not everyone is going to need a DPO. And in line with what Carlos was saying before, here in Spain we do have very good professionals, and the sector, I've known them for more than 20 years, and they were never called a DPO, but of course they could work as such without having to get a new certificate. And of course the position of our agency regarding the type of professional that should be engaging in this activity, as Gianluca said, has to do with the organizational structure and what you do in your organization, what kind of activities you have in your organization, and what your organization is about. In some cases, we'll have to look more at the technical side, and in some other cases at the legal side. But we need to have both things, because we cannot just have a person who works specifically and exclusively in the technical department or legal department. So we'll have to go case by case, and we cannot have this sort of imbalance. And that's what the officer has to do. And in my own experience as a DPO, if a DPO is good, then they have to be a good spokesperson for the data protection agency in Spain. I've always had, as a professional, their support, and they've been very welcoming. And of course, when we speak the same language, then that's good. We can talk to the administration and we can discuss our common concerns. Yes, a DPO is going to be a focal person in two ways. First, in the relationships with the authorities, for example, the Data Protection Agency at Spanish level or regional level, but they will also be the contact person for customers. In the agency, we cannot offer services to everyone, and we cannot discuss privacy with everyone, so we really need to have a channel to speak to those who are responsible for these things in other institutions. So thanks to the DPO, we can do that as well. Pepe, you are a DPO yourself, one of the first DPOs that we've had. Was it a very painful experience for you to introduce such a position in the public sector, that is somebody who is protecting data? What's the reality of your day-to-day tasks at the CSIC, at the Spanish Institute? Well, that may sound a cliché, but it is a very complex reality. We are not doing triathlon, but more than that, you have to specialize on so many things, and you really need to talk to the right people. So this double aspect of a technologist and a legal person, that's something that you have to be. For example, if we think about a recent incident we had, there was a security breach, and there was a potential leak of information through a worker, so we had to control the situation, and we had to control the different working tools by the business owner. But there's also a technological element to all this, that is the audits that may be conducted, as well as technical aspects, how the systems are working. And this hybrid position, or having at least a person or several people with those profiles, is a must. A DPO is sometimes in the regulation as a single person. They need not be in the organization. They can be an external person. But indeed, it has to be a polyedric view. And the independence of the DPO you were mentioning before, do you think that in your organization this has been understood? Do you feel you're independent? Yes, this is what I said at the beginning. I do not think about this or speak about this too much, because I'm not an independent consultant or judge, to put it somehow. I'm part of a team, and I try to solve the problems that we face. We have so many information requests, and we try to face the problems that arise. So I do not see myself as somebody looking at things from the outside and watching what's happening and then finally giving some kind of decision or recommendation. In my case, rather than looking at things from the outside and saying whether things were done properly or not, I'm part of a team. What kind of training are you giving? I think that the regulation involves training, and it also includes some information about the business profile. And you're an institution who's into training, and you're following the instructions of the agency. Who are the people who you train as DPOs, and how do you do that? Yes, we used to have a classical approach to training, but we have tried to balance the legal safety and security side of it. And now we have new courses where we have even management or managerial aspects. And that's an important aspect we wanted to include. Communication as well. DPO has to understand communication upstream. And we need to promote so-called soft skills. Apart from that, we also have training and certification, but sometimes we forget a key aspect. Maybe because we are following this line of independence for DPOs, but we need to understand and learn from the organization where we're working. So we have to learn from our risk management colleagues, from our audit colleagues, from our human resource colleagues, because they are the background for a DPO to work within an organization. A few days ago, I was at another conference on privacy, and one of the speakers said that the DPO had to be away from the money. I think they have to be close to the money. They have to be close to the money because that's where there's risk. So if there's a big business making profit through data use, the DPO has to be close to that. So we need to protect the work so that they can give their opinion, they can analyze a risk professionally and be legitimized without being pressured, and then make a decision. And that's what we need to think about when we are speaking about independence and the autonomy of DPOs. But DPOs cannot live in a bubble. This is not like a spacecraft landing at a company and then working on its own. They have to be in the business. They have to be in the operations. They have to know how the company works, and they have to learn from all different areas. And I think that the most important challenge of a DPO is to create a culture of privacy. And if you have a person who has a legal background, but they have never had any training, they do not understand the different tools, the messages, and then of course they have to be supported for human resources. I'm sure that they will not do their job right. So if we're speaking about risks, all companies go through operational risk, financial risk. They may have an RCO. So a DPO has to learn from that experience. And I think that the future of learning and the professionalization of DPOs is to have, of course, specialized trainings and courses through accredited institutions and the different certificates. But we have to understand the importance of the knowledge we get from the business itself, from the company itself, so that a DPO can really work. Thank you, Carlos. So now there's a new time where we have a DPO, a CISO, compliance officer. I think that in practice we have been doing that, but now we have a name for it. Gianluca, how do you, in the FCC, how do you combine all these positions in such a big company as yours? A CISO and a DPO, can they talk to each other, or is this something that the management has to define?
When I entered in this department, I started working for the security, and that's when we started with data privacy, and we had to report to the Secretary General. In 11 years, we have changed 3 or 4 times the structure. Financing, innovation, we're now in financing, but right now security is within the technology division to see who is responsible. So there are different ways to fit. It's important not to use our point. I agree with, if you're not inside the processes, this happened to us this week where we have an agreement with an imported world supplier to take charge of all the maintenance of our groups in our RP environment, and we were addressing all the contract area and what's going to happen, international transfers, and we have to start to ask for authorizations at the agency. So we called the legal guys in the company that provides consultancy services. They're also going to be consultants in security. No, but there are going to be no personal data. He had no idea. The legal guy had no idea of what we're going to do in the Philippines or in Colombia, where they have their manufacturing centers. And that's the difference when you have the legal person outside. So the DPO for us, in my opinion, of course, but everyone is convinced, the DPO has to be inside already. So while the person responsible for legal aspects was struggling not to sign anything, but then we said we're going to have data, we're going to have proof sets of data that can be personal and private, and we have to cater for these. So I understand that the DPO has to be inside. We speak of independence. Okay, independence, yes, but I think it has to be a mandatory counselor or consultant for the entire company. And he's not inside the department. If at the end of the day the digital turn is the one that is going to be the driver, on the one hand, and then on the other hand we have another driver, which is the regulatory element according to the new regulation. That's where they converge with technology, both of them. So we wouldn't be speaking of a DPO today if we hadn't assessed what it's all about and what the future is going to be, which is digital. All of us with huge volumes of data. If we were to think about this 10 years ago, we would know where we are. And so where's the DPO? These are the technologies. The DPO is not going to be an antagonist because, as you said, he or she will not be able to grasp everything. They're going to need to collaborate with the security department. So if we don't have the right people inside the team with sufficient knowledge, it's going to be impossible for one individual to do it all by him or herself. So I think it fits best with inside a technology division next to or by a security department, because at the end of the day they're going to have the same importance, the same relevance, and the same support, but always inside. I think the legal aspects are essential, but it's technology at the end of the day, the one that is going to drive us, as it created this necessity. The volume of data, the interaction, the connectivity is what has generated this new necessity, and that's where we're going to be, where we can contribute the best added value. Thank you, Gianluca. I've worked for many years in private business, and the first thing I thought of was how much is this going to cost? At the end of the day, we live in a day and age where we have to bring on board several profiles, and the industry is not yet willing to assimilate them because of the circumstances. However, legally we are bound to security, and in a larger company it might seem that they have a better position to assume the cost, or they may relocate someone from legal to technology, adding some training. But in reality, in many smaller companies, perhaps we might not be able of doing the same. It might not be exactly a DPO, but, well, you never know what things may be needed tomorrow. So that's the question that we leave in there. Perhaps the audience are going to ask it too. But I'd like to launch a question to you before giving the floor to the audience. From the standpoint of a DPO, what about liability? Legal liability, but also when it comes to chopping heads off, whose head goes off, regardless of their blame or guilt, but they have the responsibility, the liability. So many questions arise there. We can talk about cybersecurity or cyber insurance, but I'd like to ask you, how do you think that the responsibility of this kind of figures is going to evolve in all respects? I don't know whether you have a clear idea or... Well, in the case of Equifax, with the CSO, the CEO have left. In the case of another company, it's the same. So at the end of the day, the responsibility is going to belong to the company. And if the management believes that by putting a Turk's head that then they can chop off, they've sorted it out, experience tells us that it's not that way exactly. If the DPO is not supported by the general management, and if they are not aligned with those whom they think are the needs to comply with the regulation, I think they're all going to be out soon. Besides, we've seen this at the end of the day. In the case of Equifax, they started with a CISO, then with a CEO, and when was that not enough? When they lost 25%, more than 3 billion. So it was the CEO who was sacked. We made a mistake, and if I were a DPO, I would be quite at ease. So if you just want to sack me, then you're all going to follow suit. If I'm the CEO, I would have a clear idea in the need to support and to help what the DPO says, because if the DPO goes, we all go behind. It's a paradox, because on the one hand, we have people who do not wish to even address this nor assume the responsibilities. Other people are a bit masochistic and they want to take it on. Curiously enough, as we speak of a job with a very dangerous position, such as a firefighter or a police person, well, they are protected. I said, I wish financial directors were as protected as DPOs with a binding contract and whatnot. I think the important thing at the end of the day is for us to have a proper organization that is logic adapted to each organization, complying with all legal requirements and which may work. And when an incident happens, we have to fine-tune and see who was responsible. I doubt any DPO is going to be sacked for miscalculating a risk. I think it has to be something, quite frankly, something really negligent. Well, I'm the DPO, but I have done nothing because I know nothing and this, that, or the other. Then, yes, off with their head. Do you want to add something? From the viewpoint of the agency, and of course from the viewpoint of the regulation, we speak of independence of the duties, and we speak of the concept of conflict of interests. If all of this is sorted out, there should be no reason for the individual to do his or her job without any problem. Unless there's a case of evident dysfunction. In this case, it would be absolutely legitimate to sack this person. However, from the viewpoint of data protection, the one who is responsible will be the same, and that is the one who makes decision on the private data that are stored in the company's archives. Yes, because otherwise the DPO will be some sort of a scapegoat, and that is not the case. Do you want to add something? I agree in that there is somewhat a contradiction. As a DPO, if someone is DPO, is independent, they cannot be sacked or fired. They are some sort of an external arbitrator or judge with a special statutes that may dictate what the company does from outside. And in reality, This would be a contradiction. No measures could be adopted against the DPO. So possibly the regime will end up by being profiled by the courts. So a DPO is supported by independents, and if they go to a labor court or a labor suit, then we'll see what happens. But in reality, as we mentioned, it's a question of getting involved in the organization. I'm a civil servant. I've been appointed by the president. And if the president says so, my independence will be cut immediately. And I think it's a good philosophy. No one is going to throw stones against their own roof, and the organization is not willing to go against criteria that are reasonable because someone is theoretically more knowledgeable of data protection. I think this statute of independence, we have to see how we can materialize it, but in the administration, I see it as somewhat complex, and it would enter into contradiction with the functions that I insist are those that a DPO should have. This independence is also connected to seniority and so forth, an argument that was also mentioned when appointing DPOs. We have 5 minutes for a couple of questions from the audience. So while they bring the microphone, I would like to make the most of mentioning that tomorrow afternoon, after the sessions that are held here, we have the session of cybersecurity and law at the University of León, focusing especially. So I invite you to stay tomorrow so you get to know better what's going on in this respect.
Can you hear me? So you've discussed this, but I was going to suggest an exercise. You have spoken about the CISO, the CEO, and different positions, managerial positions, and the representative of Equifax has said that the DPO is like a shield. And I'd like to know what is the liability chain, for example, for Equifax, if we have a CISO and a DPO. So the chain of liability, yes, if we're speaking about the data protection, we have to look at the protocol. Gianluca said that now it was fashionable to see or to speak in terms of a chain, that you go to the CISO, the CEO, and in this chain, if we have a DPO, where are they in the liability chain? If in the case of Equifax, for example, well, that depends on where the DPO was located. Whether they were in a security unit, then DPO, CCO, CISO, and CEO. If it is outside, then that would have been different, and they would have saved the head of the CISO and then the CEO. So the chain depends on where they are located, where this person is in the organization. But in the end, it always goes towards the top. I'd rather not speak about a liability chain. I'd speak about joint work that the two have to do. For some tasks, I'm sure that the DPO is the first element of the chain, but in the other, the link, the first link, and then some other times it will be the CISO. Just a comment. And I think that maybe we need to explain these things, because sometimes we have to make a difference. We need to be clear about the liability. It's a legal liability or professional liability. So the person who's responsible is the criminal who's attacking you. So there's no liability there, criminal liability, but then there's a professional responsibility, whether we did something that it is appropriate, because otherwise we may think that whenever there's an attack, if some information is stolen, then people tend to think that there's a liability chain and then that these people are going to be eliminated from the structure. Of course, there may be cases like that, but it's not an automatic thing. In the case of Equifax, it's the company that's responsible for this, and the company has been taken to court. So it is there was an internal reaction in the company to mitigate this, but this has not been a legal action. that has led to this. People have resigned, in inverted commas. Yes, this was a topic that was discussed in Europe, and there's a report and the working group on Article 29 of the Data Protection Agency at European level, and they say that the liability is of the person responsible, not of the DPO. But they can go against the DPO or a consultant that is negligent, and we may have the issues of independence of these persons, but it is the person who is responsible for the file and not the DPO. So we just have a few seconds left. One last question. I was surprised that none of the speakers mentioned two people, two professionals, who have an important role to play in the companies in the future in the field of data processing, the data head and the digital head, or the digital officer. In our case, if we have an operator that's very well known to all of us, the data officer, Chema Alonso, we all know him, gives advice to the other people in the chain. So, and how do you think that we are going, how the communication is going to work with the other members of these chains? Can we be very brief, because we do not have time left? Well, this is a problem for the DPO. I'll have to speak to the chef data, and they will have to leave, the three of them, if there's no agreement. In Equifax, this is that was a problem. The chief digital or chief data, if you're not there to protect the data, then that's when your head rolls. And we know that there was a report saying the best way to be dismissed in 2017 is to have a data breach, and this is happening. All the companies that undergo a data breach, and it is proven that they could not manage this, maybe because they were too slow in downloading stuff from the cloud, they're all dismissed. So, for example, with WannaCry, nobody was dismissed or nobody resigned, but this is a case that was sorted out in this way, but we will see what happens in the future. Yes, we really have to have somebody in the organization who understands all these acronyms. That's the most important thing, because they drive us crazy. Anyway, we're running out of time. So if you have any questions, just come to us later. I'll just thank the speakers. Thank you for sharing your experience and your time, and thank you all for being here.